There were many sides to the character of my Uncle Silas which were very doubtful, but there was nothing doubtful about his friendship with Walter Hawthorn. Walter and Silas had been friends for 50 or 60 or perhaps even 70 years, though for more than half that time they had never seen each other. Walter had been a soldier, long periods of service on the northwest frontier, the Sudan, and the garrison at Singapore. He was a big man, with huge sun-dark hands, massive shoulders as stiff and square as iron brackets. He had been wounded twice on the frontier, and once in the Sudan, but he never talked about it. They had given him medals for conspicuous gallantry in a tribal ambush in Afghanistan, and others for long service and distinguished service, and he had a row of ribbons that was like a section out of a rainbow. But he never wore the medals or the ribbons, and when folks tried to get him to talk about his campaigns and his bravery, he would just say, "Yes, that was in 79. It was bad." Or, "Yes, that was in 84. That was the day." He was a man who had seen things and done things and helped to make history, but it was as though he had done nothing at all. There are men who go round the world and see all there is to be seen, and who come back and say, "It was very nice indeed." Walt Hawthorn was one of those men, except that when he came home after more than 40 years of service, he didn't even say that. He said nothing at all, and settled down to grow flowers. It was not the fact that he grew flowers that was in any way remarkable. It was the kind of flowers he grew. My Uncle Silas also grew flowers. He had always been an ugly little man, and it was as though the littleness and ugliness in him demanded to be expressed in something huge and wonderful. His dahlias were like grand velvet cushions of salmon and scarlet, his asters like ostrich plumes of pink and mauve. He gloried in sprays of monster golden lilies that were like the brasses in an orchestra. He liked roses into which he could bury his face. But Walt Hawthorn was fond of little flowers. His garden was at the other end of the lane from my Uncle Silas, and the two gardens were like the plus and minus of things. Where my Uncle Silas's flowers flaunted and flared over the hedge in the sun, Walt Hawthorn had scarcely a flower that could look over the fence. In spring he grew things like forget-me-nots and violets and narcissi and Dresden daisies. In summer he had Virginia stock and snapdragons and pinks and button asters. When he went to my Uncle Silas's garden, my Uncle Silas would take a yardstick to the dahlias. But when Silas went to see Walt Hawthorn, Walt would take him to see a rose no bigger than a thimble, or his 6-inch fuchsia in a pot with flowers no bigger than a pendant earring. They went on like this for years. It seemed to consolidate their friendship. With other men, my Uncle Silas boasted of his flowers as he boasted of his women. Or he lied of one as easy as he lied of the other. But he never boasted to Walt Hawthorn, and, except for one simple occasion, he never lied. Walt Hawthorn and my Uncle Silas, though they differed in almost every other way, were alike in one thing. They liked to drink about midday, and every day just before 12 o'clock they walked down to the Swan with 2 nicks, and, without fail, they drank the same thing, a pint of draught ale. One day when my Uncle Silas shouted, "Ready, Walt!" over the fence, it was 3 or 4 minutes before Walt Hawthorn appeared. It was a blinding hot day in July, the crest of a heat wave that had been rising for almost a week. And when Walt appeared, my Uncle Silas noticed a curious, unusual thing about him. He was wearing a bunch of flowers in his buttonhole. Normally, beside my Uncle Silas, Walt Hawthorn looked like a man on stilts. But that day, as they walked down the road in the blazing sunshine, it seemed to Silas that Walt had shrunk a little. The brackets of his shoulders seemed to have bent down a little. His feet kept scraping the ground. My Uncle Silas looked at the flowers in his buttonhole. "Taffed up a bit," he said. "Ah," Walter said. His eyes were fixed on the distance. "Got my medals on?" Silas did not take much notice of that remark. He took it for a kind of joke. He did not take much notice of the next remark either. "Don't walk so fast, General," Walt said. The reason Silas did not take much notice of this remark because there were odd times when Walt Hawthorn did call him General. What he noticed was that Walt was walking very slowly. Silas noticed this all the way to the pub and all the way back, and he noticed it even more the following day. It was hotter than ever that day, and Walt had a bigger bunch of flowers in his buttonhole. "Got your medals on again?" Silas said. "Yes," Walt said, and suddenly took one of the flowers, a pansy, and put it in Silas's buttonhole. Silas did not say anything. There was nothing very odd, after all, in putting a flower in the buttonhole of a friend. But when they reached the pub, something else happened. Walter began to take all the flowers out of his own coat and put them into Silas's buttonholes. Not only the buttonholes of his coat, but the buttonholes of his waistcoat, and then the buttonholes of his trousers. The large sun-brown hands moved very gently. They handled the little Virginia stock and pansies and pinks, limp now from the sun, with crazy affection. My Uncle Silas did not say anything, but as he sat there, letting the flowers be threaded foolishly and lovingly into his garments, he felt that he saw a big man growing little before his eyes. He saw the eyes of a big man who had seen the world and had helped to ham out its history, becoming the eyes of a child who had seen nothing and wants to do nothing better than play with a handful of flowers. Gradually, Silas got Walter Hawthorn out into the sun again and began to lead him home. For a time they walked very slowly. Suddenly, Walter leapt into the air and slid down into the ditch by the roadside, pulling Silas down with him, and began to fire at rebel tribesmen on the northwest frontier. It was then that my Uncle Silas began to tell lies to Walter Hawthorn. He told him lies about everything: the dead, the living, the way the fight was going. After the skirmish was over, he got Walter back to his house, and then told more lies. Yes, there was plenty of ammunition. Yes, the general was here. Then Walter began to point to the flowers in the garden, raving. "See 'em!" he yelled. "See 'em! See 'em, General!" And Silas got ready to lie about them too, thinking that perhaps Walter saw them as soldiers. But Walter leapt up in crazy terror. "It's a mirage!" he shouted. "It's a bloody mirage!" Soon after that he became quieter. He sat in the kitchen, in the cool, out of the sun, and Silas gave him a little whisky and water. Then Silas got him to lie down on the sofa, and after that he went home. It was less than 2 hours when Silas went back to him. When he went into the garden in the dead still heat of the afternoon, he was dumbfounded. The flowers had been pulled up everywhere. They were strewn over the paths and the grass and the steps of the house and in the house itself. They had been clawed up in a desperate savagery of a man who sees a mirage and wants to grasp it before it vanishes. And Walter himself was lying down among them, exhausted, like a man who had fought all his campaigns in a single afternoon. Later that evening they fetched him in an old-fashioned limousine, with black bob curtains that could be drawn over the windows. He was quite quiet and gentle, and Silas helped to lead him out of the house. In his huge, feeble hands he held large bunches of little flowers. "Well, General," he said to Silas, "where are we bound for this time? India?" "India it is," Silas said. He stood in the road and watched the limousine depart. As it went down the road, he saw one of Walter Hawthorn's huge hands come out of the window. The hand flung flowers onto the road, and in that moment it seemed to my Uncle Silas that Walter Hawthorn was a happy man.